Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to this masterclass in photography. Where do I begin? I've been doing photography for many years, probably close to 15, more than 15. And today I want to share some of the things I've learned along the way to you. And this class is designed for beginners, but I'm sure like even people that have done this for a while would benefit from this, because photography has different ways of being seen and being approached. So every photographer has a different way that they approach it. And so even for myself, I keep finding myself learning new things from people along the way, be they new photographers or seasoned photographers who've been doing it for 40 plus years. So hopefully you pick something along the way, and along with this there should be a guide, and that is the guide that I'll be coming and speaking from. So if you have it, you can follow along, and hopefully it will help elaborate some of the things that you see on the guide. Let's get started. I'll first begin by just breaking down what we're going to be doing for this class. I've broken it into four. We'll come and talk about, the first thing is understanding the human perception of vision. As human beings, we see things. What we see is not actually what the reality is. A camera sees reality better than we do, I know. Hopefully by the time we're done with that segment, you'll understand this a little better. The other thing what we want to talk about is understanding light, because photography, the photo in photography stands for light. So the word actually means drawing or writing with light. That's what photography means. So it's essential that you understand light. The other thing that we're going to talk about is the camera basics, just the basics of the camera. How does a camera work? We will come and break down all the elements, not all the elements, the basic things in a camera. They're not that many, about 4 or 5 that you need to know in order to come and understand. Once you understand those, every camera works. Every camera will always have those things. It works the same. And lastly, we'll come and tie back to number one, which is understanding perception, the way human beings perceive vision. We'll come and tie back to that by showing you some techniques that you can use to come and incorporate into your photography, so that you take advantage of the way the human mind perceives vision. So those are the 4 segments: understanding human perception of vision, understanding light, camera basics, and lastly, techniques for shaping perception. Those, I think, would be in this little time that we have, is the best way that I can come and do an intro to photography. So let's get started with understanding the human perception of vision. The human brain doesn't actually see light. Light is a chemical process in the human brain. So what happens is there's like little rods and cords inside your eyes that take information from the light that comes through the lens in your eyes, and that information is changed into chemical/electrical signals, and those are taken to the brain, and the brain interprets that in a way that makes sense for you to be able to live in the world. So what has happened to human beings is, as human beings have evolved, certain things, the eyes and what you see, the brain has come and shaped that perception in a way that helps the human being survive. And I'll show you a few examples so that you can understand that what your eyes actually take in is not actually what the reality is. So the first thing that you'll see, if you're following along the guide, there's a picture that's on your screen. So here's what I want you to do. Everyone just get ready. Just focus your eyes at the center of the picture. Don't move away. Just look at the picture by itself. Don't change where you look. Keep looking. And right about now, you should start to see like the picture starts to become hazy or disappears. For some of you with a more active imagination, the picture might actually completely disappear. And the reason for this is your eyes come and the picture has colors in it, but then they mean nothing. So your brain starts to ignore that stimuli. And then your peripheral vision takes on the white that's around the picture and starts to come and say, maybe it's important to the brain. And so the brain starts considering that. And that takes time for the brain to come and try and make sense of this blob of colors. And as long as it's useless, the brain will just come and say, no. Here's another illusion. You will notice that whichever circle, some of the circles seem to be moving. And you'll notice that whichever circle you place your attention on stops moving. And the reason for this, again, is because the brain processes like high contrast things that are contrasty, like black and white. It processes them a lot faster than low contrast colors like gray or the fuchsias or cream. Those colors the brain just kind of has no need for, because throughout evolution, the colors that had the most strong contrast were the most important for survival. And so the brain takes that information first and then slowly processes the other. And the lag in that processing is what makes the wheels seem to spin, just because of that lag in processing. But there's actually nothing spinning on the screen. Again, this is again proof that sometimes what you see is not what actually is happening. It's just the way the brain works. Here's another thing that we're going to come and put up on the screen for you. Have a look at this picture that comes up. See this picture with a green cube and on top of a chessboard, kind of. So do you see the square written A and the square written B? Would you believe it if I told you that both squares are actually the same color? The brain can't tell little shades of color without context. And so, or rather, little shades of colors are hard, they're insignificant to the brain. What gives the little changes, the little differences in color or intensity or saturation importance is the context. And so here you have the green little thing standing up, casting a shadow over a white piece. And so you imagine that it will be dark, but it wouldn't be as dark as something that was supposed to be black in the first place. And so it appears to be light. It's because you know that it's a white square and it's only darker because of the shadow. So in your mind, the context given to it is this is a white box. But then when you come and see in the second picture where they're connected with a gray strip that's the same color, you see that they're actually the same exact color. But your brain gave one a different color or tone than the other. Again, another example that whatever you see is not what actually is. And this is really important to understand, because when you come and take pictures and you've seen it many times, it's the reason why insurance companies and banks are colored blue. It's because the one thing that's consistent in human existence is the sky. The sky is always blue. The sky is dependable. It doesn't change. Clouds change, trees change, the soil changes, water changes color, the oceans change color. But the one thing that is always the same color is blue. So subconsciously, the brain associates blue with stability, dependability, and not changing. Another example is the color red. Red is the color of blood, the color of ripe fruit, the color of meat. And so, whenever you see red, it's associated with danger or passion or appetite. That's why restaurants are colored red. Let's go to the next thing, which is light. And light is what kind of brings all this information that we've been talking about in this section to your eyes. So light has two components to it. There's something called illumination, which is the brightness or not so brightness of the light, and wavelength, which is the color of the light. So the wavelength determines the color, illumination, the intensity determines, illumination is determined by the intensity of the light. So illumination can be divided. There's different photographers who use different terms or place different emphasis on different things, but primarily these are the three things that you will find in almost any lesson you do to do with photography. The first is hard light, then there's soft light, and then there's reflected light. So hard light and soft light are related. Reflected light is kind of separate on the side. You'll understand once we talk about it. So hard light is the light that comes from, most of the time, from a singular source. It doesn't have to be, but then most of the time from a singular source. So it's the source of the light with nothing in between and straight on the subject. That's called hard light. What hard light does is it casts really harsh shadows. That's the first quality of it. On a surface that has any kind of shine to it, it makes the subject look shiny. You can use hard light to make the subject more pronounced. Sometimes you can use it to make it more defined, the subject. So it depends. If you're shooting, say, a product and you want to isolate it from its background, you can use it that way. A lot of the times that will be the use for using hard light on a subject. Soft light is kind of what you see on a cloudy day. So I don't know if you've seen on a movie set, sometimes when the sun is out and they need to come and have a day that looks like it was a little bit cloudy, or you don't want to have those harsh shadows, they have a big screen that they put on top. I don't know if you've ever seen it, like a really big screen that they put above the actors, and then they shine the lights down. That's called a diffuser, and it's supposed to come and diffuse the light. So what clouds do is they come and scatter the light rays. So the light rays are not going straight, they're scattered by the clouds. And that makes the light soft. It's not light that's just bouncing straight back off of the subject. So it removes, it doesn't have the shine, it's more evenly lit, and it includes more, it makes the subject and the background kind of mesh together. So if you want to make something seem at one with its background, like the example that you're seeing on screen, there's a baby and you want to come and make the baby look like they're part of nature, they're tied in with the grass and the leaves around them, then you would want to use soft light to light the subject. So here's a picture that I took that I wanted to come and put a little highlight on the subject, but at the same time make them feel like they were part of the background. And so I had a light, a strobe or flash that was lighting the subject, and then the sky and the sun and the clouds were providing a soft light backdrop. And so you kind of have a feeling where it's almost a dreamy look, where someone is part of like a dream. So the subject is still a little bit pronounced and isolated by the hard light, which is a flash, and the background still kind of mesh into the background. So with all these things that we're talking about, the more you come to, nothing is used in isolation, hard light, soft light, the more you come to understand how they work and what they mean, the better you get at mixing and matching them. Reflected light. Now this is actually what we mostly see in pictures. Whenever you see a picture of a person or a tree or the ocean or anything, when a picture that has a subject, almost always, like 99.9% of the time, what you're dealing with is reflected light. You have a light source, the sun, it is shining on the person that you're taking a picture of, and that is what you then capture in the camera. So you're not taking directly, you're not taking a picture of the light source directly. So those three are the main things in my view. There's a lot of other ways to consider light. We won't get into them now, we don't have the time. But primarily there's hard light and soft light. If you come and understand just those two, you'll have understood about 80% of everything to do with the intensity of light. Those are the two most important things to understand when it comes to light. And then understanding that what you see is reflected light. Next up, we have the wavelength of light. And as you probably have heard, light travels in waves. It's a little more complicated than that, but we won't get into it. But yeah, the higher the wavelength, the higher wavelength of light appears to us as blue light. And if you go beyond that, it becomes ultraviolet. And the lower wavelength of light appears to us as color red. And below that is what you've heard referred to as infrared. Now, again, for evolutionary reasons, these colors have come to be associated by the human brain with certain emotions and appetites. And so we'll go through a list of them, and I'm sure as we mention them, you will feel the resonance. You'll feel it resonate as true for you. So we'll start with the color red because that's the color that we all know. And red is the color, like I said earlier, of blood and ripe fruit and of stop signs. I don't know if you remember this scene from the movie in The Matrix. There's the lady that's walking in red and immediately, like, you notice her. Next up we have yellow. Yellow makes you feel happy and spontaneous. It's just the nicest color. Like, and again, I think this is primarily because it's the color of sunshine. Green makes you feel optimistic and refreshed, and I think that's kind of obvious. It also symbolizes health and new beginnings and wealth. So it's not a coincidence that the dollar is colored green. Blue, I've mentioned that earlier. Blue makes you feel safe and relaxed, and it conveys security and trust, like we had mentioned before. Purple is the color of creativity. It's associated with mystery, creativity, royalty, and wealth, because purple was only found in rare things. Purple is only found in very rare things, rare flowers, rare gems, and so the times when you see it, it's things that are not commonly, purple is not a commonly occurring color in nature, and so the few people that have it, when you see it, it's mysterious because you don't see it everywhere, and so every time you see it, you're curious about it and you wonder, I wonder where this came from. Brown is the color of soil, of the ground, most of the time, and of tree barks, of the barks of trees. And all those things are things that are stable normally. Like if you want to come and tie your cow somewhere and you want to know that you'll find it there after 2 days, you'll tie it to a tree. The ground, you never expect for the ground to give way beneath you. Black is the color of sophistication, seriousness, power, but it's also been associated with mystery and sadness. But when you want to come and do neutrality and professionalism and power and strength, black is kind of a color that you'll use. White is the ultimate neutral color, and so whenever you have white, you're trying to balance out, trying to negate everything else. What you could use white for is to emphasize whatever your subject is. So hopefully these make sense, and hopefully there's a lot more to this as you can imagine. We're just touching the surface because of the time that we have. Hopefully this kind of makes you curious enough to try and go and find out for yourself more information and more things to know about color and color theory and color psychology. And it's a rabbit hole. You can go really far with it. This is really just the surface, just because of the time that we have. But it's something that I find very interesting. And if you're really looking into photography, then it's something that's really essential to have in your knowledge basket. Let's move on to the actual camera, which is why we were here in the first place. So we'll come and talk about how this works in this next section. So how does a camera work? There's 5 main things to consider. There's a lot more things, but then let's just deal with 5 for now. There's 5 main things to consider when thinking about how a camera works. There's shutter speed. We'll explain each one of them in depth as we go. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO, metering, and focus. If you understand those 5, every camera will always have those 5 things. So shutter speed is, the way a camera works is you have the lens, and then you have a thing called a shutter, which opens and lets light in to, before it used to be a film, nowadays it's a sensor, for a certain amount of time. It could be 1 second, it could be 1/8,000th of a second, and I'll show you an example of what that looks on a camera. And basically that is called a shutter. It opens and closes. And how long it lets light in determines many things. How dark the picture will be, how bright it will be, how blurry the picture will be or not. It lets you take pictures of stars at night. For example, this image that you have on the screen, this one I took with a shutter speed of 30 seconds. So I left the shutter open for 30 seconds, and with a few other different settings, I was able to come and take this picture. And the shutter opens for 30 seconds and closes. Then there's pictures where you see people running or Formula One cars going really quick. So that would be probably 1 at 16,000th of a second. The shutter opens for that shot. And so those are different things. If you ever see something that has motion blur, like you see a person running but you can see a bit of their leg left behind, that's a shutter speed that's open for long enough so that you see it exposes from when the leg moves from one place to the other, maybe 1/60th of a second, and that looks like you can see the blur. And sometimes you want to have that effect when you're taking a picture to show speed. So this shutter speed I have set. Inside there, what you're seeing is you're seeing the shutter in there. And so when I take a picture, you see the shutter goes up. That was a 1 second exposure. I can change it so that this is 1/60th of a second. This is 1/4000th of a second. This is 1/8000th of a second. So, and those things make a big difference when it comes to how much light is let in. You can go all the way down to opening the shutter for 5 seconds. And now that's all that light is going to the sensor. You're able to just go down to the sensor and then it closes. And that's how it works. So that's what a shutter does. Next thing we're going to look at is a thing called aperture. So aperture is, you see this is a lens. See that little hole in the middle of the lens? That's what aperture is. Now that can be changed and made, you can make that bigger. You see the way it changes? That is what aperture is. So that's a lens completely open. What this means is it's letting in a lot more light. And when you close it, it lets in a lot less. The larger the aperture, the less the light. The lower the aperture, the more the light. Yeah? So this will make things, it'll make things in the background seem blurry. When you want everything around your subject to seem sharp and in focus, you'll come and make this a larger aperture. You'll make the hole smaller. And that lets in less light, but then it makes everything around the subject look in focus, or rather more around the subject to be in focus. So other than just making an image darker or brighter, this is a thing that, this is another thing that aperture does. So it's good to know. If you look at the images on the screen, also the other thing to remember is this works on the foreground as well as the background. So it makes things around the focus where you focus your subject to look darker or not darker, to look more in focus or not. So the things that are in front of that subject will look out of focus, the things that are behind it will look out of focus. That's when you have a large aperture. So that's just a thing to note. So ISO is the same thing as ISO. The way you come and say we have ISO standard for factories and things. So ISO is a standard for adding light artificially to an image. So sometimes ISO mainly almost always comes, is a thing that you're using when you have low light. You almost never have to use ISO when you have bright light outside. So ISO will normally range from 100 to sometimes some cameras have even 32,000 ISO. But mostly if you go beyond around 3,000 or 4,000, then you start seeing a thing called noise and grainy. Your pictures become grainy. But what happens is sometimes when you're taking a picture at night and you can't, it's a moving picture or it has motion in it, you can't open your shutter speed for long. So what you need to do is boost artificially the amount of light or the appearance of light on your camera. And so every camera has an ISO setting, and that is the setting that will be able to come and help you add artificially the amount of light in your image so that it's visible. Metering used to be really important a long time ago, before every camera nowadays had an internal meter. But also metering is almost only important when you're shooting. You don't have that much time to kind of shoot and look at the image that you're taking and gauge what light should be done. If say you're at a wedding and at an event and you want to come and keep taking pictures, you come when your camera is on auto mode, then you will come and have a meter inside your camera that comes and decides for you what is the best setting for your shutter, your ISO, and your aperture. It comes and sets those settings based on the light coming in, the reflected light coming into the camera. The camera comes and has a meter inside it, and it determines which is the right amount of for the right setting for the shutter speed and for the aperture and for the ISO. Finally, there's focus. I think focus, everyone knows what focus is. Almost always your subject will be the one in focus, but every once in a while, again, once you put all this information that I'm giving you together, it's not the only way to come and emphasize something or someone. In this picture, for example, the thing that you're curious about is the thing that's out of focus. And so sometimes there's no hard and fast rule when it comes to photography. Actually, if you take nothing else away from this class, it's that there's no rules as such. There's many things. You can achieve the same effect in very many different ways. And that's what photography does. It gives you all these tools. It's up to you and your creativity to come and choose how to put them together to come and tell your story best. And so focus is basically the plane. It's like a focus is a plane that moves forward and backward, and it's where the sharpness intersects with reality. And what you choose to focus on most of the time is where you direct your attention when you're taking pictures. Last but by no means least, let's talk about how to put all these things that we've talked about together. Let's talk about the ways that you can shape perception. The first thing that is the most important when you're taking pictures is story. Story is conveyed by emotion. It can be conveyed by sometimes not emotion. You can just take different things and just put them together, and this will come and put together the story. But story is really important. What are you trying to say? Most of the times when, especially when you're dealing with people, you will come and look for emotion. You'll look for their faces to come and tell happiness, sadness, pensiveness. But story is the first thing you should have a thing that you want to come and say. What do you want your image to say? So this image, for example, is just an image of a face, but you can kind of feel, it makes you curious. It almost tells a story, like you're curious to know what is happening, what's the story behind this image. Next is a thing called rule of thirds. As you can see the picture on the screen, this zebra is placed on the far left of the image. The rule of thirds says that you should divide your image into 3 parts, horizontally and vertically. And so putting your image primarily on the one side on any one of the 3 things horizontally or vertically puts emphasis on it. And if you want to put even stronger emphasis, you kind of put on the 4 dots where the lines intersect in the middle of the image, place anything on those 4 intersections, any one of those 4 intersections, and that gives it even more emphasis. The other thing that you can use when you're taking pictures is a thing called natural frames. The brain looks for natural occurring frames. So the brain will look for things, geometric shapes. The brain will look for geometric shapes, triangles, circles, rectangles, squares, and anything that is inside of that within your frame, within your photo frame, the brain will kind of come and try and find a way to anything that's within that frame, within your photo frame, the brain pays attention to. So it's another way to come and put emphasis on the subject, especially when there's a lot going on in your photo frame. If you want to isolate the subject, you kind of put it in that naturally occurring frame within your frame, and that will give it emphasis. Another way to come and give emphasis to your subject is what we learned when we were talking about aperture, the depth of field. When you come and have your aperture completely open and your subject in the middle, and when you blur out the background, this kind of gives the brain a subconscious cue to focus on what your subject is, and that way your subject looks like they stand out from the background, and that's called using depth. So there's many ways to use depth, but one of them is using the depth of field. Another thing like we spoke about is color. You can come and use color to emphasize the subject, to give it a certain emotion. So in this picture, everything else is dull, but once you come and add the red dress, it makes the subject seem more passionate, more engaging. It draws your eyes to the subject and makes the image a lot more compelling just by use of color. Had that dress been gray, the image would not have been as strong as it is. The last one we'll talk about is patterns and repetition. The brain loves symmetry. It loves naturally occurring repetition, things that are the same, patterns. The brain looks for them. It looks for things that make sense. And so when you put them in your image, it is very naturally pleasing to the brain. So anytime you come and see something that has repetition, if you're taking a picture of, say, something that would normally be boring, find things that are repetitive in that image. It could be an ocean, look for waves. If it's a forest, look for trees that look the same. If it's the sky, look for clouds that look, okay, maybe clouds wouldn't work. But if you're taking a picture of the sky, maybe look for, the birds that fly in a triangle, like look for those, and that'll just kind of, the brain sees anything that has a pattern in it. It's naturally pleasing to the brain. So with that, we've come to the end of our masterclass, and hopefully this has given you an introduction into photography. It's made your mind a little more curious about photography, probably introduced you to things that you hadn't thought about. Each of the topics I've spoken about has a lot more depth to it. Hopefully we can come and keep doing these classes and go into a little more depth on each of these topics. But even if we don't, there's a lot of information on the internet that you can come and look up for yourself. And hopefully this has given you a good starting point.